All right, it's really great to reconnect with Franklin Camargo, who works at one of my favorite organizations in the world, PragerU. I'm sitting in Dennis Prager's old chair right now as I have this conversation, and as I'm trying to hold down the fort in Dennis's old radio slot on all the Salem stations. Dennis is a hero of mine. I'm a donor to PragerU. We're partners with them at Breitbart. We love PragerU. And Franklin is their resident Venezuela expert. Franklin, you've been on once before, but remind people of your history and how you ended up at PragerU from Venezuela.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's so important to talk about these issues right now. Yes, I was born and raised in Venezuela. I had to flee my country in order to save my life because I was accused of being a terrorist by the Maduro regime, right? Maduro, who is now in New York, and he's gonna hopefully spend the rest of his life there. But the regime is still in Venezuela, and let's see what happens. But yeah, his regime accused me of terrorism. Why? Because I spoke out against his dictatorship, and anyone who does something like that in Venezuela puts his life at risk. Actually, there is an anti-hate speech law in Venezuela, like the ones that the left wants to promote here in America, which basically means that they can arrest you for posting on social media, because at the end, hate speech laws is about anything that the government hates.
Yeah, so this is really essential here because you're someone who's targeted by the Maduro regime. You made it very important. We haven't really had regime change yet. People are throwing that around. We've had a change in leadership of the government, but it's still the Maduro regime to a degree. And so that's one thing to keep an eye on. But just give me the emotions. Like, what was your thoughts? Because this was pretty unexpected. There was almost nothing leaked to the press because, as Tommy Tuberville put on my show a couple of days ago, I mean, would you want Eric Swalwell and his Chinese spy girlfriend figuring out that this raid's going to happen ahead of time? Of course not. So almost no one knew anything. It's total shock. What was your reaction when you heard the news?
Look, I couldn't believe it. I was actually first sleeping and my mom woke me up by calling me. She was like, go on X, watch the news. Like right now the U.S. is, attacking the regime in Venezuela. At that moment, we didn't know yet that Maduro had been captured. And, I was watching the videos. Some media outlets were contacting me. I was overwhelmed. And I have to tell you, not even in my most optimistic dreams, I thought that we could have an operation like that one. We're talking about first, which is very important, no American died. No American was killed.
It's unbelievable.
This
we got at least 32, I think maybe it's even 40 of those Cubans that Maduro paid off to defend him because he couldn't trust his own people, which is crazy. And then not a single American. Unbelievable.
Yes, and not a single American, and it was a very precise operation. And we captured not a president, we captured an indicted criminal. He was indicted in 2020, in March, in a federal grand jury of Southern New York. And those who talked about no one is above the law for 2, 3, 4 years,
no
those
kings.
who say no kings, we don't want any kings.
Democracy.
We love democracy.
Right.
We love, actually, this is actually funny and it's a joke, but probably Maduro is the only Venezuelan criminal that they don't want to be in the U.S. Like for many years they opened the borders. Bad Venezuelans came in, criminals from Venezuela who were sent by Maduro, by the way, and they committed crimes. They came into the U.S. and Democrats and the left, they were okay with that. But Maduro, no, we don't want him. No, I'm actually so happy for everything that happened. I was overwhelmed, but the fact that it was the United States, the Trump administration, this country, the greatest nation on earth, who did that, who conducted the operation, it just makes it even better. It's the cherry on top, because I have to tell you, as someone who grew up in Venezuela with deeply admiration for the United States and the values and ideas that made this country the greatest country, you are indoctrinated to hate America. You're indoctrinated to hate the United States. So to see the United States actually going after a criminal who tried to take advantage of U.S. citizen, who in some way was involved in the killing of U.S. citizens like Laken Riley, because Laken Riley, let's remember, she was killed by a member of Trinidad, is just perfect. It is amazing.
Yeah, and I'm happy to hear your enthusiasm. So, and I'll link up in the show notes our first interview so people can hear more about your history, which is fascinating. But I want to talk practical, what we're looking at now, because we've got Delcy Rodríguez, who's in power now, who's actually further left. I mean, he's more of a Marxist, but I'm guessing that she's the one cooperating with America. And then we've got these other characters there like Diosdado Cabello, who's probably been unfamiliar to anyone who reads English language news aside from Breitbart readers, because we've been reporting on him for a long time, who seems completely criminally insane. The guy seems absolutely nuts, a total drug lord, wants to be dictator of the country. It seems like those are the two main options right now, and it's not great. So there's a lot of work to be done. What's happening now? And then my follow-up to that's going to be, what do you feel like are next steps to ensure the peace?
Well, first is that the regime is still there, but I think the regime has never been this weak for multiple reasons. First, they witnessed how Maduro was captured in such a successful operation. Secondly, because there is a strong administration in the strongest and most powerful country in the world. I'm talking, of course, about the Trump administration that is not willing to compromise. They're just going to tell Delcy, Diosdado, you are going to follow what I tell you to do, or you're going to pay a higher price than the one that Maduro paid. You know, Maduro underestimated the U.S. He underestimated Trump. He was dancing on a stage. He was actually challenging him to go to Venezuela and capture him. Well, Maduro did it. And I don't think Delcy Rodríguez is necessarily going to do the same. Do I trust her? No, I don't trust her. As you said, she comes from a Marxist family. Her dad in the 70s kidnapped an American CEO. So we're talking about horrible, terrible, radical leftists that we shouldn't trust. But I do trust the Trump administration. And I have good news for you, actually. A friend of mine who I met in Venezuela when I was a teenager and I was a political activist, and she was a political prisoner for the last 2 years. Just in the last few minutes, she was freed. So we're talking about some cooperation that is already existing, you know, in Venezuela.
So one thing that's interesting is that Cabello who's really the head of the cartel, the Suns, it seems like operationally, which is the main drug cartel down there, and would cause a lot of the problems. Why did we arrest him? Because it feels like he's going to cause problems, or is that intentional?
Look, I think it was probably intentional. You know, I've been reading that maybe existed the possibility to try to arrest both Maduro and Diosdado, and maybe Diosdado was impossible. Marco Rubio said, if I remember well in Free the Press, that, you know, capturing one person is already complicated. And actually, he receives so many criticism from the left already. Imagine trying to capture 2, 3, 4, 5. So I think it was more about the logistic of the operation. And Maduro at the end, even though Diosdado is the second most powerful person after Maduro, he was, and now he's probably the most powerful. And he's a terrible person too, and he must pay for his crimes. Maybe the easiest thing or the most practical thing to do was to go after Maduro first. And you know, of course, I don't trust the regime. The regime is still there, but I trust the Trump administration, and there are reasons to be optimistic about.
Yeah, I think so too, and that is. I think Rubio's correct. That makes sense. You can't get everyone at once, but we're seeing the regime arresting some people who are suspected of celebrating Maduro's arrest. That's not a good sign. I don't know if that's Delcy. It sounds like something that'd be more Diosdado's kind of wing. Who do you think tipped the U.S. off to this, that they could pull this off? Because my suspicion is it's someone in Delcy's orbit, just based off of, seems like everyone else got sanctioned, but what's your take? Look,
when Marco Rubio and Donald Trump, just hours after this operation, they said, we have been talking to Delcy Rodríguez and she's going to obey us. You know, the easiest conclusion to have is that Delcy Rodríguez, in some way or another, she actually cooperated with the Trump administration, even before this operation. And of course, there is a traitor, actually Nicolás Maduro's son, whose name is also Nicolás Maduro, so Nicolás Maduro Sr. He's crying and he's suffering. That makes me so happy, like really so happy. He said that there were traitors, and the traitors are gonna pay for what he did, for what they did. So he's implying that, yeah, of course, there were people within the Venezuelan regime that gave and provided information to the U.S. in order for this to happen. And of course, the easiest conclusion to have, at least for now, until we have more information and more details, is that Delcy Rodríguez, in some way or another, probably was involved in that. Yeah. So I'm just wondering if Diosdado is going to coup her and what could happen next. And it's all the stuff that we're watching. I want to get your predictions and work in Maria Corina Machado into this, because she, especially after the Nobel Prize, is sort of everyone's fantasy leader of the country. But I feel like if she even goes there now, she's just going to get assassinated. And I feel like that's seems like a terrible idea. But again, your mind starts wandering when you start seeing all this positivity. Yeah, you have to be pragmatic. Look, I met Maria Corina Machado, as I said, when I was a political activist in Venezuela when I was younger. And she's a fantastic person. She is very popular in Venezuela. People want her to be president. She led a movement that was, very enthusiastic against the regime. However, we have to be pragmatic and realistic. If she goes to Venezuela right now, she's in Europe, she had to escape, she had to flee. If she goes to Venezuela right now, she would be probably arrested. She would be killed. If right now she tells the army to, let's say, free the political prisoners, they're not going to follow her. It is just the reality. Even though she has the consent of the Venezuelan people, she doesn't have the de facto power. She doesn't control the monopoly of force. She doesn't control the army. She doesn't control the members of the military. So what the Trump administration is doing is actually very basic, we cannot simply capture everyone. So let's capture Maduro, and those who are still in power are gonna, follow what we tell them to do. Otherwise, we're just going to capture them as well. But Maria Corina Machado, probably she can be a candidate when we have free elections in a year or so. But in the meantime, we need someone to actually run and control the country as we want them to do it. So the easiest way to do that is to have those people who are still in power, and there are terrible people, but that they know they have to follow the commands that the Trump administration is going to give them.
So one of the things that I do in the media is I've appointed myself the person who points out when Trump is actually taking on China, when he's taking on some other country. And this is another one of those instances where China's incursions into Venezuela have been politically calculated. They're getting a cut rate on oil that should theoretically be sanctioned and is completely outside of international norms. They're moving into our hemisphere. Trump has been pretty open, even though he's very nice about China, but he's pretty open that we're going to get the oil now, and we'll make sure China gets some too, but they're going to have to pay a fair market rate for that. But basically, this is just stems from the Belt and Road debt trap that China runs, where they give the infrastructure to struggling nations, third world nations, and they get free stuff in return. In this case, it was oil, basically, from Venezuela. And that's not the type of stuff that Donald Trump tolerates. There's no real question in there, Franklin, but I want you to react to some of that.
No, I totally agree with you. When we talk about Venezuela, we mention very often that it's the country with the largest oil reserves, right? Yes, that is a fact. 80% of the oil that is being produced in Venezuela goes to China. You, as the United States of America, who understand that China is your enemy, you shouldn't trust China. You actually want China to control a country that is only 3,000 miles away from Florida and that is taking over the resources? No, you don't want that. And the United States and Venezuela, before Chavez, before the socialist revolution and the socialist regime, they had a long relationship, a long history of good economic relationships. The United States built assets, infrastructure. Private oil companies put investment there that was later nationalized by the socialist regime, by Chavez. So we also need to ask ourselves, because leftists love to talk about Venezuelans and they care about Venezuelans' oil and, oh my gosh, we're going to steal their oil. When the United States and Venezuela were doing businesses around, oil and natural resources, that was when Venezuela did the best. Venezuela in the 50s used to be the fourth largest economy. At that moment, you had American companies investing in Venezuela. And both countries were actually getting huge and amazing benefits from that. So the people who actually want U.S. companies to invest in Venezuelan oil are Venezuelans. They are the ones who actually would benefit the most. And of course, Americans would benefit from that. And that is good. That is amazing. That's what free trade is about. That's what Western countries should do, should align themselves with common goals and fight against China, fight against Iran. Or you actually think that China was in Venezuela just because Venezuelan girls are pretty? No, it was because of oil. They get 80% of the oil that is being produced in Venezuela.
Franklin, it's really interesting. You prompted me to look something up. Caracas is closer to Miami than Los Angeles. Like, no one thinks about this. I've never thought about this until just now. I wish I thought of it 4 days ago. It would have made my content better, because I would have.
It's like a 3-hour flight. Yes,
it's unbelievable. So that's the case, and so of course that we don't want China there. And it's just nice that Trump is just sort of spells it out for us. I know you got to run, Franklin, but PragerU for all your stuff and all your socials. But what do you want to happen next? And I like to use the word pragmatic because we got to be realistic here. I try to bring a realistic lens to the show. But what are you hoping the next steps are?
Well, first, what the United States did was an amazing operation. That, of course, the United States needs to have something in exchange for that. You know, so I want U.S. companies to invest in Venezuelan oil. I want oil American companies to go into Venezuela and do businesses there. I want all Venezuelan political prisoners to be free. And in the mid-long term, because we have to be realistic, I would like Venezuela to be a free country and to have free elections and to be a normal country where individuals have the right to exercise their speech, to have property rights, and to pursue their own happiness, you know, which is a constitutional right here in America. So that's what I would like in the long term, and I think the Trump administration has that goal. My only concern is that political transitions are not that fast. And here in America, we have a midterm election in November. We also have another presidential election in 3 years. And I'm afraid that a Democrat is not going to be willing to do what is needed for Venezuela to be a U.S. ally. At the end, we have a record, right? And while Biden was freeing narco-terrorists from Venezuela that were here in the U.S., Trump just captured Maduro. So the difference couldn't be stronger. And talking more about domestic policy or domestic politics, I don't think Florida is going to turn blue at all, at least in the next generation. Yeah. Cubans, Venezuelans, and Nicaraguans, they are the biggest Trump supporters right now. Let me tell you, it's insane.